Module 4, vCenter Server. It's important to know that vCenter Server enables you to centrally manage multiple ESXi hosts and their virtual machines. Failure to properly install, configure, and manage your vCenter Server could result in reduced administrative efficiency and possible ESXi host and virtual machine downtime. With that being said, if you do not properly configure your vCenter Server, you're going to have issues. You could have issues with your ESXi host, you could have virtual machine issues, and it mainly revolves around downtime. So we don't want downtime in vCenter Server. You want it to continuously be up so you can monitor the status of your host and your virtual machines. There are 5 lessons in this module. We're going to discuss Lesson 1, vCenter Server Architecture. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to meet the following objectives. What is the vCenter Server architecture? Discuss the vCenter Server deployment models. Identify vCenter Server services, components, modules. What is a platform services controller? Discuss the REST-based API and describe the vCenter Server high availability, or known as HA. The vCenter Server appliance is a free pre-configured Linux-based virtual machine that is optimized for running vCenter Server and associated services. The vCenter Server appliance reduces the deployment time of vCenter Server and the services associated with it while providing a low-cost alternative to the Windows-based vCenter Server installation. This vCenter Server appliance package contains VMware Photon OS 1.0, the Platform Services Controller group of infrastructure services, your vCenter Server group of services, and your PostgreSQL. Your vCenter Server appliance uses the embedded PostgreSQL database, which can scale up to 2,000 hosts, 35,000 registered virtual machines, or 25,000 powered-on virtual machines. During deployment, you can choose the vCenter Server appliance size for your vSphere environment and the storage size for your database requirements. Starting with 6.5, the vCenter Server services that are included with your vCenter Server appliance now include your Update Manager extension, your support for HA, high availability, and Platform Services Controller support for file-based backup and restore. So let's take a little bit deeper look. According to VMware, your vCenter Server is a simplified and efficient server management software. It's centralized. You got high visibility of it. Simplified. Easy to manage. Easy to scale. And you can extend it. It's very extensible across the hybrid cloud, all from a single source, from that single console. And with that being said, if you look here in this diagram, you have a vCenter Server appliance sitting at the top, which is your main headquarters. It's also attached to the cloud, which you can control. You got your efficient management, your scalability, extensibility, control, and visibility. I highly recommend that you go on VMware's website on their product documentation. Read about vCenter Server. It goes over what vCenter Server does, the simple deployment, control, visibility, management. How extensible is it? Proactive optimization. Go read about it. So what about the vCenter Server Management Platform? We just talked about it. It's an application service that acts as a central administration point for all of your ESXi hosts and their virtual machines connected on a network. That service basically directs the actions of virtual machines and the host. So we have our vCenter Server sitting up here at the top. We have host 1, host 2, and host 3. Within each host, we have VMs. We have 4 VMs showing here per host, and you can have up to 25,000 running at any given point. Just notice all of these are managed through your vCenter server right here. With that being said, you got multiple capabilities which we will discuss a little bit later on, such as vMotion. Take this VM, take VM1 from host 1 and vMotion it to host 3. Over here, all that's done through your vCenter server. So what about the vCenter server services? They include your server, your PostgreSQL database, vSphere Web Client Server, vSphere Auto Deploy, ESXi Dump Collector, Syslog Collector, Update Manager. One important thing I want to point out here is on this slide, you cannot distribute these vCenter server functions across multiple servers. When you deploy the vCenter server appliance, all of these features, as you see right here, all of these are included. All the features are already included. So let's talk about the core services. They include the management of your resources and your virtual machines by the inventory service. They deal with statistics logging, task scheduling. You can manage your alarms, events, provision virtual machines, configure your virtual machines. Distributed services. They include vSphere vMotion, your DRS, Distributed Resource Scheduler, high availability. All these are installed on your vCenter server. What about additional services? The database interface that provides access to your vCenter database. vCenter provides access to your ESXi host to a vCenter server agent, which is started on the host when it's added to the vCenter server inventory. So if we back up a screen, once we add host 1, host 2, and host 3 to the vCenter inventory, that vCenter server agent is started so you can have access through your vCenter server to manage your whole environment here. This diagram shows some components of your vCenter server appliance, starting with your vSphere clients. The vSphere Web Client is used to basically connect directly to all of your ESXi hosts. As you see right here, it is connected to this ESXi host. Your vCenter server database, which is embedded here. That's the most critical component, which VMware says, and in my opinion it is also, is this vCenter server database. It stores all of your inventory. It controls your security, resource pools, performance associations, and any critical information needed for vCenter server to run properly. We have our single sign-on. Single sign-on is basically your domain. It can be configured to authenticate against multiple user repositories or identity sources, something that we call Active Directory domain. We can manage our host and our guest all through this. And as you see, being we've connected to the vCenter server appliance here, now we can manage this host along with these 6 virtual machines as shown in this slide. We can manage our database. The Photon OS is already included in it. We have our platform services controller. So as you see, this is a one-stop shop for management. So let's look at some of the maximums in here. VMware did a good job by putting together your maximums on the amount of virtual machines. vCenter Server Appliance basically now scales the same capacity as your vCenter server that is installed on a Windows server. As you see right here, it's broke down. vCenter Server Appliance, right here 6.5. 2,000 hosts per vCenter server. 25,000 powered on virtual machines and up to 35,000 within it. 64 hosts per cluster. 8,000 virtual machines per cluster. Your Windows 6.5, it must be Oracle or SQL for full scalability. But for your vCenter Server appliance, we already have the embedded Postgre database. Enhanced link mode. Both of these. Great adds from VMware. So your vCenter Server appliance is functionally equivalent to a vCenter Server installed on a Windows server. Who's ever used it on the Windows server? Well, we may or may not have. Go research the differences. Look at what it can do, what it can't do. Your vCenter Server appliance can be figured as an embedded system with an internal platform services controller, or as a distributed system with an external platform services controller instance. Now the vCenter Server appliance supports enhanced link mode. So let's talk about some of the differences right there. You can deploy the vCenter Server appliance on the ESXi host because it is a pre-configured Linux-based virtual machine. The vCenter Server with an embedded platform services controller basically are all the services bundled with the platform services controller, which is here, platform services controller. So just know all the services are bundled or deployed on the same host machine as the vCenter Server. So as you see right here, platform services controller is hosted on the same machine as the vCenter Server appliance. Now, your vCenter Server with an embedded platform service controller, this is suitable for your smaller environments. 8 or less product instances. Great, great, great for small industry with 8 or less product instances. What about your vCenter Server with an external platform services controller? As we see here, we have our platform services controller on one instance. Then we have our server appliance on separate instances. But with this, you must first deploy the platform services controller appliance on one virtual machine or host. Once you install your platform services controller, then you install it on a different machine. The platform services controller can be shared across many products. This is suitable for your large environments with 9 or more instances. So just remember, embedded, 8 or more, or 8 or less, my apologies, 8 or less instances. External, 9 or more instances. And that comes from your larger organizations. So here are some deployment models. They're recommended for the platform services controller in enhanced link mode. For enhanced link mode with an external platform services controller without HA, and what is HA? High availability. The platform services controller is configured on a separate virtual machine, which you see here, without HA, on a separate virtual machine, and the vCenter systems are joined to that domain here. So you see we have them joined. Okay? And this provides the enhanced link mode capability within the external platform services controller without HA. So this is without HA here. What is it without? With HA. So with HA, high availability, the platform service controller appliances are configured on separate virtual machines, which you see here, 1, 2, and configured behind the load balancer, which is here. This load balance then provides the high availability to the main configuration of your platform services controller. After that is configured, then your vCenter server systems are joined to that domain by using a shared load balancer, which are sharing it across the entire domain via virtual machine or server by IP address. This model then provides enhanced link mode functionality that is resistant to failures. High availability, resistant to failures. So what about the deployment models that are not recommended for platform services controller in enhanced link mode? For enhanced link mode with embedded platform services controller, the vCenter server system is installed in an embedded configuration on the first server. Okay? Being it's installed on that first server, subsequent installations are configured in the embedded mode, which you see here, and not joined, but they are joined to an existing vCenter single sign-on domain. The linking embedded platform service controller appliance is possible, but this configuration is not recommended because an external configuration for this controller appliance is preferred. So let's look at it right here. In combination deployments, which we have here, linking an embedded platform service controller and an external platform service controller is possible. Here we have it embedded, external, but the configuration is not basically recommended. An external configuration for the platform service appliance is preferred. So this is the preferred model. The deployment model is not supported for enhanced link mode. For the embedded platform services controller in the vCenter server system linked with an external standalone vCenter server system, linking a second vCenter server system to an existing embedded vCenter server system and that platform services controller is possible, but VMware does not recommend that configuration due to an external configuration for the platform service controller is what is preferred. So as you see here, we have an external vCenter server system linked to an embedded vCenter server system. This is our external here, linked straight back to our embedded. APIs in vCenter or vSphere 6.5, it pertained more to the developer. Made automation more friendly. REST-based API for automation and development. It provided in several programming languages that allowed you to build service capability into your vCenter server appliance. We got SDK for Java. We have SDK for .NET, REST, Python, Perl, Ruby. Each of those SDKs contain automation of APIs, bindings to your vSphere. vSphere Web Services API, API reference, programming. So some of the benefits, it reduces API development, complexity, and time. You get access through modern automation and development processes for consistent and repeatability. Have a simplified API model and a single point of access for all API samples. As you see here in the main slide here, we have our vCenter server sitting here with a REST API. Automation tool, SDKs, REST-based tools, any documents pertaining to it. High availability. High availability for your vCenter server appliance protects against both hardware and software failures that ensures your implementation can recover quickly. The protected node is called the active node. two other appliance nodes are created, a passive node and a witness node. If this active node fails, the passive node takes over the role of the active node. Once that happens, the state of the active node is replicated to the passive node and captured in the PostgreSQL database while containing all those configuration files, which all is a revolving door. It all comes back. This is where your replication happens, but it all comes back here to your witness or your quorum that does the work and controls your file to your public IP. There's one thing to know though, before you can configure your high availability, there's several things you need to consider. Internal or external platform services controller. What components are needed? They use different versions of vSphere. Really look at this and say, okay, do I want HA? Do I not need HA? Something to consider there. You should now be able to meet the following objectives. What is the vCenter server architecture? Discuss the vCenter server deployment models. Identify the vCenter server services, components, modules. Explain platform services controller. Discuss the REST-based API and describe your vCenter server high availability.